The Christian world, they've long assumed that the Garden of Eden was a geographical location upon this earth. Now, down through the centuries, there's been many self-proclaimed teachers that said it was in Asia, it was North American, and we find many of the, I won't name the sects or the religious denomination that claims that it's right here in the United States. I've even heard some of them say that it was along the mountain ridges of Kentucky, one of the oldest land masses in the world, quote unquote. But none of them seem to have any positive proof that will stand up in the light of scrutiny. But the idea occurred to me years ago. I was mistaken in my premise, but I believed that it was in or near Asia. Part of my reasoning was because it said that Cain was driven eastward of Eden to the land of Nod, meaning the land of the wanderers, of the nomads, or of the Mongolians, possibly mixing with the ancient people who existed before the advent of the Adamic man. But where I went wrong, like so many other people, we ignored the word driven. And I guess that if I had to stop at that time and examine my idea that here was God running down the road with a switch and he was driving this bad little Cain and the bad little Adam and Eve, driving them out of this garden, if it were on this earth, with a switch, saying you can't come back no more, and he put some angels at the gateways or the entrance into this mythical land, as it would appear, of Eden. So I had to examine some of my own ideas, and then as I got more advanced into this, and I realized that like Enoch and Elijah and Ezekiel and these many men, that tells quite clearly that they were flown into the celestial planes beyond our earth. They were driven in some type of a flying ship. And so I went back and I re-examined the idea that when it talks about Cain, what was he driven out in? And as we go to a lot of the ancient records, we seem to find evidence of people who preceded Adam. They were very close in kinship. They were Semitic type people, as we quote and speak of in other tapes where we talk about even the Indians of Central and South America. They told about a great lord. They equated him to a god that was by the name of Kuku Khan. And later on we find out where they speak of Quetzalcoatl, which we proved in some of our tapes that it meant to them that he was a man of or from Venus. He was a good man, he was a godlike person, and they seem to think that he was more compassionate, and they show us that he was one who came later than this Kuku Khan. And as we've shown in other tapes, that this mysterious man that showed up, well, when Cortez, when he went into the Americas, the Indians thought this red-headed, blue-eyed Spaniard, they thought he was Quetzalcoatl who had come back, and they were willing to accept him as a god without arguing about it. There's, be honest with you, I've never read the book. I've seen it advertised in different magazines about did Christ walk the Americas, and was he possibly the one that they referred to as Quetzalcoatl. As far out as it seems, I won't get into any argument about that, but having been an amateur archaeologist, and you find in the Sumerian language, as the archaeologists have dug up some of their pottery and all, we find a name that is very close to Kuku Khan, and this would be from an older history, and they spoke of one called Gangung Khan. And so we cannot deny the similarity there. And I'm somewhat of an amateur archaeologist, and I've spent over 2 years living in different parts of Central and South America and talking to archaeologists that were working in those areas and people who were knowledgeable. And I brought back in 1969, I brought a vase back that was supposedly dug up from one of the ancient kings of that nation, and they had leopards on the handle and different symbols on it that represented that he was a king and he had great authority. And so is there a possibility that these kings were a lineage of this great Khan, the one that our Bible describes as Cain? Now, as we search the records of antiquity, we find that Cain was considered a mighty hunter. He was a great lord, a great general. He was referred to as the leopard king. He was referred to as the sun god. There's many other things about him, but also while in Peru, I was able to bring back some very interesting beads. We'll get into it in more detail as to what ancient tribes they belong to, but I had it confirmed by a lady who was a great archaeologist and had lived there, I forget how many years. But on examining these beads, she said that they were way over 2,000 years old, and one of them in particular I have in my possession is in the shape of a spaceship, and it has a star on it that encompasses the whole bead, but actually it's not a bead because it would not show off its beauty if it was strung in the normal manner of stringing beads. And then I have another one that looks very much like a space capsule with fins on it and so forth, giving those that would view it the idea of something that would rotate. And it is my opinion that these things were worn as amulets so that they might invoke the attention and the mercy of the gods, as they referred to them. Now, when we get back to one of these great men of antiquity, because a lot of people get confused because they find that when Cain went eastward of Eden, and it talked about the fact that on his honeymoon, apparently, and the preachers have never answered to my satisfaction just who did he marry. If Adam and Eve and Cain were the only ones here on the earth, where did he get his wife? Because there's so many of these preachers, they get upset when you tell them that there was pre-Adamic people. But yet I know in a lot of the church denominations that if you read the footnotes, especially, I don't know about the newer ones, but the older Schofield Bible, where Schofield put his footnotes to a King James, he speaks of pre-Adamic people that preceded the Adam kind here. And so one other point I should make here, that Cain, he named this city after his son, and he called him Enoch. As we study the beginning of Genesis, there appears to be two men called Enoch. And we know that Enoch was considered the eighth from Adam. There seems to be a good Enoch and a bad Enoch, if you want to put it that way. But in studying the records and what writings we have available through the different languages and nations discovered at different times that have been brought to us from throughout the world, we find that in the book of Enoch they render the word Nod, N-O-D, not N-U-D. And in the old writings as we search the writings of the old Enoch book, they render it Nud, N-U-D, not N-O-D. But it still means the same thing, the land of the wonders. It talks about a land of nomadic people. Let us question some of our ideas and see if they will stand in the light of scrutiny, for I think it would appear that we're stuck in a third-dimensional thinking, such as, let's take, for example, Jerusalem. When people hear Jerusalem, they think of the old walled city of Israel that goes back into the days of antiquity, apparently to some of the very first generations, the recording of the Semitic man. Now some will agree also that there is a New Jerusalem, as it's mentioned in the 38th chapter of Ezekiel. It was to have a different geographical location, but most people want to go so far as to believe that that he would establish the second Jerusalem. But then when we research the writings of Paul, and we find others, they speak of a new Jerusalem that is to come down out of heaven or the universe. And so does John in Revelation. He referred to it as the holy city, the New Jerusalem, the city of God. Now, as we've shown in other tapes, what we maintain is a great space station. Some call it the holy city. I maintain it's Zion. I maintain that it is the Garden of Eden. And through the ages of recorded history, there have been many names given to it by the different authors of antiquity. But so far, the scientific and the religious world has not been able to follow the name changes and to understand that these different ancient writers that lived centuries apart, they equated it to the understanding or the name of their age. In the light of some of these things that don't seem to add up in the light of our religious training or thinking, the first clue that disturbed me or disturbed my thinking, you might say, is I said under a young man or an older gentleman while I was a young man. I said under him from approximately 20 years. He was a lawyer and quite a learned man. He was a great student of Scripture, as well as he was versed in the ancient languages, such as Hebrew and the Chaldean and the Greek. And he told me that the book of Genesis was not in a proper chronological order, and he believed, it was his premise, that the translators had possibly put it together by subjects. Now, we're not going to try to defend this, but it's worthy of consideration as it will make sense as we move along. And we find in other chapters that we can prove by a little research that the translators, they've changed the entire meaning of words, which in turn they change sentences and paragraphs and chapters, eventually affecting and corrupting the entire meaning of our Bible. Now, as we've dealt with these and many words in other chapters, we will forego the repetition. But one point that we want to make now, what does Eden really mean? Eden means in the masculine, it comes from the word Aiden, A-Y, D-E-N. Also, it means a region of Adam's home. Now, those that would argue with me, I say, well, if you have a Strong's Concordance on your shelf, you should get familiar with it. And if you disagree with this, then you're going to have to throw that rather expensive book out. Aiden, A-Y-D-E-N. They had another choice. It was pronounced Edna, Edna. E-D-N-A-H-E-D-N-A-W. It has the meaning of pleasure, delicate, delight. And then translators, they ignored Beth Eden, or B-A, it would be pronounced B-A-Y-T-H-A-Y-D-E-N. It means a house of pleasure. So if this is truly the Almighty's house, that New Jerusalem, that holy city, and etc., well, I would say it would be a house of pleasure. It'd be a pleasure to be there. They also, the translators, I believe they became very confused because there was a place in Syria that was named after it, and after the word Beth Eden. And we have to understand when it talks about Beth Adam and so forth, it means the son of. So in this case, the place was obviously named Beth Eden after the sons of Eden who came to that area and established it. Like the Pilgrims, as we've said before, when they came to America, they named many places in this new world after those of their original homeland, such as New York and New Jersey. New. So we find another Hebrew word they rejected, B-A-Y-I-T-H. It was called Bayith. The abbreviation of it would be a house in the greatest variety of applications, especially family, race, court, daughter. Now we have all heard the daughters of Zion. We've heard of the bride of Christ. So here, daughter, fourth of X, great, or would contain a hanging home, born, household, inside, word, palace, place, steward, table. We're going to deal with this word table. Oh, now what I've been quoting you here, this is all from Strong's. It says table, temple. Now we're leaving out quite a few other words, but I didn't realize when I first lectured on this subject quite a long time ago, I didn't grasp the significance of this hanging home, this palace, and I wondered, why did they equate it to a table? Well, as I got further into the research, that word table popped up in so many different things. As in the near future, we're going to do one about King Arthur. And we show how many centuries ago in Wales, they corrupted even a more ancient tale about a Arthur that goes back into the very first records of these ancient Semitic people, and they seem to allude to, and it was lost in the corruption. It talked about the gathering of the knights, which in the Hebrew talked about the noble ones, the great lords of space, where they gathered around the table, and the significance was lost by the book of Revelations, where they referred, the King James translated the city that's 4 square. Well, we proved it was pi times r square. It was given the dimensions of something that was circular, round, could be round like a baseball or a basketball. It might be easier to equate it to. And then we go back in another one of our chapters where Christ came upon this black woman who he healed her daughters. She was a Greek citizen, but by original nation, she was Syrophoenician. And Christ said it wasn't meant for her to give his bread to dogs or the meat to the dogs. Well, that seemed a terrible thing to say to somebody, but he called his sheep the children of Adam, these Israelites, his followers. He called them sheep. So allegorically, these different nations, the Bible talks about even in the New Testament, the sheep, the goats, the hogs, the dogs, and the serpent people. So he equates people to an animal image. And as we study our astronomy of the stars, there's a great allegory. This is the old idioms. And this woman that spoke to Christ, she said, "Don't the dogs under the table?" In other words, I traced it all down and knew that and found out through even Strong's that it was referring to Venus as a table. Today we would say a space platform. And in researching out the pillar that followed them through the desert for the 40 years, if you look that up in the original Hebrew, it's referred to as a platform, similar to a table. So we get back in all of these descriptions here: table, temple, tabernacle, hanging home, where they talk about a house in the great variety of senses that is applicable to a house, a race, a family, like a family tree. Keeping this in mind, boy, we're going to uncover some things here where it talks about the trees in the garden, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. But we find in other word that related to this was Beth Hashita, pronounced Bath Has Jata, and it was interposed house of the acacia. Now see, we're talking about a tree, and all different sized trees. And this is why I'm bringing this up, is I realize that this tape, this chapter here, it should follow Moses and the burning bush. I believe it gives a great deal more truth, that where they translate the plains of Shinar, we could equate it to the plains of heaven, and Farrar Fenton interpreted it bushland. So it came from a land that it was equated to a smaller tree, and so Venus is very small compared to our sun, and it's very small compared to the other suns that our astronomers have discovered in deep space. So we find that on the chapter of Moses at the burning bush, when he said he was among the so-called acacia bushes. Now this, the translators put it into plural, but here, note this, acacia bush. He saw an acacia bush apparently on fire, had fire spurting out of it, and we pointed out that they put in bush instead of temple, tabernacle, or here, see, a round table, a space platform, something that landed that was round. That we don't know for sure how many this could have housed, for they interposed the word Sues. We found this in another chapter in searching out, as we said before. Remember in, let's see, was Zechariah the 6th chapter, when looking up the word horses, Sues. So a lot of times they lose us because we can't comprehend that he went from a smaller shuttle ship to a larger ship in space that was to take him to this great space station. But we found that the word Sues meant something that was made of iron, like a spaceship, and it said it had a driver inside, saying to Moses there, get ready to take off in the Sues, not your shoes. Now, we find the word Bethshita refers you to Beth Haram, pronounced Beth Haran. It's from the word, if you care to go look it up, and the Strong's Concordance from 1004 and also from 7311 of the Strong's Concordance. With the art interposed here, house of the height, or house in the height. Now remember, Christ said, in the Father's house there are many mansions. And you look that up, and it means places of habitation, places that mankind could inhabit. So let me go back. Now, this is from the Strong's Concordance, those words I told you to look up, house of the height, or in the house of height, mistranslated mountain, or the house of the Most High. Beth Haram as the house of the ram. Now, we go way back to Abraham. And when he went to the mountain, and he was going to sacrifice his only precious darling son that was born under very mysterious circumstances, where it seemed that Michael, the great archangel, played a part in this. He was a very special seed. And here he was, an old man, but through the obedience to the Almighty, he was tested by this angel of God. He was willing to sacrifice his son, Isaac. And as he raised the knife to slay him, the angel of the Most High told him, you don't have to do this. Look over there in the thicket, in a bush. See the great allegory, the mystery that we've missed here? There was a male lamb without spot or blemish, representative of the Messiah that was to come to save Israel and to redeem them, to redeem the Semitic people, to redeem these people, these space invaders who had come here, who had been kicked out of other worlds. But notice, Beth Haram as house of the ram, like the family tree of Christ. The lamb, Christ was referred to as the Lamb of God. And later on then he was known as the Lion of Judah. And we, the sons of Adam, the sheep of his pasture, the sheep nations, the household of the family tree. Now, at this point, we want to make it quite clear that no race or nation who's willing to bend the tree as a nation, the knee, who's willing to bend their knee, regardless of what race or nation or who you come from. But it was God's children that sinned. They violated his commandments. It was given to Israel, not to these other people, although I'm afraid they're going to share great judgment along with us. But he foretells of the day, even in the Old Testament and New Testament, when every nation, every kindred, and every tongue shall bend the knee. He said, whosoever shall come to me, I will in no wise cast out. So I don't want this to sound like it's some racist religious fanatic that say that the Semitic people are only God's little honeys and everybody else is going to burn in hell. That's a religious hogwash and myth. Now let's go to Genesis, first chapter and the second verse. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The word Spirit was put in by church translators to appease their church fathers. We find the word Spirit here is Ruach. If you want to look it up in your Strong's, 3707, and it's R-U-W-A-C-H, and it's pronounced Roach, R-O-O-A-K-H, Roka. And it's from 7306, Strong says, which means wind. As you see our chapters on eagles in Luke 17 and 37, wind-like flight, as to breathe effortlessly, as in a wind-like flight. Remember Ezekiel 1 and 4, when he was caught up by the wind in the Farrar Fenton translation. But when King James so-called translators, and it was not a translation, it was stolen from 3 other Bibles, and all they did was go through and corrupt it further, and they took the word wind out and they added spirit. Then, as we pointed out, what Ezekiel saw, a whirlwind unfolding. So, continuing with this word, ro'akah, wind by resemblance, breath, or even violent exaltation, life, anger, unsubstantiality. By extension, it says, a region of the sky. By resemblance, spirit, but only by a rational being. Tempest, whirlwind. See, all of these words that have been subverted and converted to other words that has left us in the dark, and we can't get the connection between the space travel and where they were going. Because as we will show in other chapters where they've translated Moses and Christ and these others going on 40-day fast, I do not refute the idea that any or all of them didn't fast, but many places there they have mistranslated it. The 40 days, it was talking about the time that it took to travel to this particular place, And if we are right in our assumption that we're going to prove here, we can actually, you could feed it into a computer and know exactly what speeds they traveled, which are so phenomenal that I believe that even our scientists would get mental indigestion, and a lot of them would refute it and say it's not possible, maybe not in their world and not in their learning and understanding at this time. But we're talking about great extraterrestrial societies out there who are mentally and scientifically so advanced to us that it gives us mental indigestion. So now as we go to Jeremiah, the 4th chapter and 23rd verse, and we quote, who quotes Genesis 1 and 2 exactly. And he goes on and he tells of the fierce anger of the Lord. Now was he talking about Michael, the captain of tens of thousands of these extraterrestrial ships, who destroyed great cities of people? And who were these people? Were they Adamites? Now in this verse, is he talking to Israel? In Genesis, they were called Israel, so was Adam now called Israel? In Jeremiah 4, being warned to look back at history and learn. In verse 427 of Jeremiah, he said, he did not destroy all of the people in the cities, but left to some to reproduce. Now, this is where I have to confess for a long time, until maybe it was God's Spirit that gave it to me or allowed me to see it, when this new heaven and new earth that John, it appeared to come down to him. Now notice, one moment he calls it a new earth, one that he had not seen before. There's nothing coming here to replace this. It just talks about one coming near to us. And as he was landing in this holy city, see, he called it an earth, then he called it a city. So we fail to understand when we go back and we read the great depths of new understanding we can have, which we would never have understood. It had been lost to us if Jeremiah hadn't looked at it. But it talks about the men that were driven from them to go and hide in the rocks and the clefts of the rocks and so forth. Were they talking about leaving these worlds that were referred to as cities? As we will show some of these other ancient nations outside of Israel and those of the Bible that we referred to as heathen, they talk about wars of great flying cities that were shot down. They were destroyed. So we have to go back and look at this in a much broader sense. So were these cities? No, I believe they were worlds. They were planets. I believe that I need to go back and do a real research and study on that. I think it'd be a real exciting thing, because as we spoke in other chapters, as we will be dealing at a further time, we're going to show that there's a lot of people have proved it, where it talked about Noah, Noah, where it talked about he lived in the land of the rockets. But as we've discussed this in other chapters, people could not conceive of rockets, and the ET was left off, so then we had magic rocks following people through the desert. But let me quote this 4:27 from Jeremiah. For thus said the Lord, for thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet will I not make a full end. Well, if he's going to leave the land desolate, but he didn't make a full end, he didn't totally allow this planet to be destroyed. Then came the command to replenish the earth. And we've long assumed that it was this earth. But you cannot replenish it unless there was someone there before. Now, all of this seemed to have happened here because, as you read, this is talking of a time that is ages, that has been mistranslated or erroneously translated days. This is still talking about the first day or age, that eon or that time period. We don't know how many thousands, possibly millions of years this was talking about. But I believe that all of this happened millenniums prior to Adam's appearance on the scene on this planet. back to Adam. Take Adam and Eve in the garden. Now, as the Sunday school teachers would have us believe, and you pick up all the old books and even the new books, and you'll see it periodically on TV when some of these jerks advertise underwear. We see Adam and Eve standing in the garden naked as jaybirds. And they're hanging around in some tropical swamp, so they would have us believe, with mosquitoes and gnats and ticks. That'd drive anybody crazy, chomping on your bare backside. Now they're walking around barefoot with snakes crawling around. Do you suppose the snake had a push cart and he was selling poison apples to Snow White? Just think what nonsense this sounds like to an unbeliever, an atheist, or anybody of average intelligence, or a thinking person. First of all, the Bible doesn't say anything about apples or talking to snakes. So there's a lie that has gone unchecked for hundreds of years. So when you go trying to tell a scientist or anybody intelligent and you start with a premise like this, no wonder they don't want to examine the evidence, because it's a fairy tale. They say, well, there can't be anything intelligent there. But what is the Almighty? What do you have to say about modesty? Let's take Moses, for example. He built an altar to the Most High Yahweh God in Exodus 20 and 26, and the Farrar Fenton translation, and he says, "Thou shalt not pile up pyramids for an altar, so that your nakedness may not be discovered when you go up it." Yes, they wore robes, and as far as we know, they didn't wear any underwear, because it could really chafe you over in that hot climate, as I believe that our men are learning by now. If you read the rest of the chapter, you found out that this was a commandment of modesty that was given to Moses. We all know that the Almighty said, "I am the same yesterday, today, and forever, and I do not change." And then you ask, why was Adam and Eve naked? They were not. Proof? Most preachers know nothing about the ancient language and its usage. All serious students of ancient history, such as the Bible, they should get a book that is entitled Idioms, called Idioms in the Bible Explained, and a key to the original Gospels. It was written by George Lamsa. I don't guarantee it, but I believe that any of you that should be excited about this, I don't concur with everything that the man said, but he was born over in that country, and he claims that his people still speak the same ancient language, excuse me, that was spoken there in the days of Christ. Lamsa renders Genesis 2:25 naked as exposed, ashamed. Let's carry it a little farther, and it'll give you a better understanding. In Genesis, at this time, could we get the fact that said he was trying to hide because he was naked? The Almighty asked him who told him he was naked. Would you like to have a son that was so stupid that somebody had to tell him he didn't have on any clothes? So here's our first clue that there's more to this than meets the eye. No pun intended here. But that was not bad enough. Adam became the first snitch. He blew the whistle on Eve because she did something shameful or naked. What Eve did is another whole subject, but that we have to skip over for the time being. But what did nakedness mean here? Was that Adam and Eve, they were without knowledge of sin. They had disobeyed a law. They disobeyed the Almighty. To prove the consistency of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, let us go to Isaiah 20:3 in the Amplified Bible for just a moment. And it reads like this: "And the Lord said, as my servant Isaiah has walked comparatively naked and barefoot for 3 years, for a sign, for a warning concerning Egypt and concerning Cush," that is Ethiopia. I believe in the ancient days that they referred to the whole continent as we know it today as Africa was Cush. Note the word sign is a clue meaning they were without knowledge. Revelation 3:7 of the Amplified, for you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I have grown wealthy, and am not in need of nothing, and do not realize and understand that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked, without knowledge, protection, or defense. So it would be quite apparent here if we sum it up. It seems that these people, they lost their protection. They lost their defense, which they found, like King David later on. He says that the Almighty was his fortress and his high tower. He was his shield and his buckler. But it seems that when you stray from the Almighty and you ignore his commandments, then you leave yourself wide open to the adversary. Then they refer us to Hosea 12:8. So are we blind, pitiful, and kept stupid by our hired preachers? Revelations 12:15. See, I approach like a thief. Happy the watcher who clings to his clothing, so that they may not walk naked and should see his shame. So clothing is correct knowledge. We are to dress ourselves in so that we might be good watchmen to warn other people and nations. It would appear that the nations are not listening, because the next verse tells us that the nations, that they're going to be drawn into what people refer to as the Armageddon because of lack of knowledge. As we study idioms, it'll probably upset your apple cart as it did mine. Did not Christ say the truth would set you free? As I tried to tell my Adam family, they are a heaven-born people and they get upset. So we might have a better insight into understanding the book. Let us explain idioms and see what we missed. Christ was aware of idioms. The Greeks called them parables. Well, there is a slight difference there, but example, Matthew 13:10-17, to paraphrase it, the disciples asked Christ why he spoke in parables, and he answered them by saying he didn't want them to understand. Speaking a multitude of people who apparently had come out of Babylon, and the Israelites, with the Israelites, when they went back to Jerusalem, we find that Christ said he came but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and there was people here apparently he didn't want to claim. He didn't want them to hear or see the truth. In verse 16 he said, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. And the book by Lamsa, we find that he was raised speaking Aramaic in a community that apparently they followed the customs and the language largely unchanged since the time of Christ. This book, I believe that you'll find that it offers fresh and accurate translations of important idioms, metaphors, and figures of speech that is found in the Scripture. It also provides clear explanation of the meanings in the biblical text. Another sad situation is people who are taught just to be the New Testament Christians. And if you don't understand the Old Testament and history and prophecies leading to future events unfolding, then you never will understand the New Testament, for the end of a circle is the beginning. So Revelations and Genesis, you'll find that they dovetail and parallel. For in Revelations 21:3, I, John, saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So now we see this holy city, this New Jerusalem, it's referred to as a bride. And we've always thought that God was coming back here for his bride, but it appears allegorically that the Almighty's a polygamist, that he has other planets and worlds and people without end. Now Revelations 21:24, and it goes on and gives us some insight here that man has never comprehended, and the nations of them which are saved. Now that's the word from, I believe, Sartorius. It means drawn to a place of safety. They shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. not on the outside of it, but into it. The key word there is into, and it's still talking about this holy city, or what I maintain is a space station. Remember what we said about Moses, that he was taken in a Suez, or a Caribbean ship, into the temple, the house, the mount of the Most High. He showed you the mount as it was called Yahweh's abode forever, which all is one and the same. He talked about going in. How about those that were kicked out or driven out? Driven out in what possibly? We've covered this. I think we've proved it in Genesis 4:23 from the Moffat's translation. So God the Eternal expelled him from the park. See, now he calls it a park in our day and age, as one of the ancient translations. The park of Eden, to till the ground. I believe the next verse was added by translators, to till the ground from which he had been taken. Now most Bibles admit in Genesis 3:20, where it says that Eve was the mother of all living, was added. We know Genesis, as well as the other books, have been mistranslated and tampered with, and the translators or the scribes who copied the old King James Version, as I said earlier, from 3 earlier versions, they didn't understand that Adam and Eve were not from this planet, only brought here to this terrestrial plane. We find that Christ and Abraham, they both testified to the fact that Adam and his descendants, they were just visitors. They were pilgrims, or as we cited, David said they were aliens. But we find a strange verse in Matthew 13:38 tells us the Almighty planted good seeds. He goes on to say that they were sons in the world, which he called the field, translated from Eretz, meaning that planet. And they were to become the children of the kingdom. Then it goes on to say that this Satan, this adversary, he planted some bad seed in the same field, which were to be gathered by the angels and burned like Sodom and Gomorrah. He had the seed with him when he came here, with the what we will refer to as the Adamic man or family. Genesis 3:24 of the Moffat, he drove the man out and he set cherubs. This is the way he spelled it correctly. He did not use the Greek cherubims. He set cherubs, these types of ships, at the east of the park of the Eden, with, he tells you, like the blade of a sword, flashing in every direction to guard the path to the tree of life, which we've stated the Egyptians called the house of life. Now, that describes a saucer as it rotates like a fan blade turning fast. So they had to compare it to something that they were familiar with in their day. Now, the plural word cherubims indicate that there was more than one cherubim or cherub, with a jet of fire coming out of it, or a flying saucer, as we would say in our day and age, as we check 2 Samuel 22:11, and it says, it's speaking about a great space Lord. It doesn't give his exact identity. It just says Lord, and that does not always mean the eternal, as we've pointed out before. 2 Samuel 22:11, he rode upon a cherubim, and he did fly, or a cherub, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. So there we don't have the word spirit. It's telling us something that was able to fly through the air. We believe that there were 36 cherubims or cherubs to guard the entrances, as there were 12 entrances, 3 on each side, the north, south, east, and west. John told us this. This place was called the Holy City, the Garden or Paradise, where the thief went with Christ. As we turn to Ezekiel 10:4, the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub, also the house, temple, or New Jerusalem, and it was filled with the cloud, We see in other chapters cloud or clouds refer to extraterrestrial ships or those conditions round about them created by these cherubims or cherubs. There are some more very interesting verses that will help prove our point. Now we have to bring these up, that these different types of ships that were traveling, but nobody has ever really understood. It's been there all the time, what their destination and where they were. Why would the Almighty keep that a secret? We couldn't comprehend it till our space age. Genesis 5:24 tells us, and Enoch, he walked with God and was not, for God took him. As we told you before, you go back and check the translation of walk, meant he flew with somebody that they referred to as a god or great space lord. Note the word walk is misused throughout the Bible, as the Almighty did not put on jogging shoes and walk down a country road with our progenitors. The Hebrew word translated walk is halak. It's H-A-L-A-K and is pronounced H-A-W-L-A-K, halak. It is used in a great many ways, some meanings as to whirl, like a whirlwind, a whirling saucer, depart, forward, go up, abroad, up and down, as in lift off. We find Strong's concordance. He refers to Yalak, pronounced, well, it's L or Y-A-L-A-K, and it's pronounced Yalak, Y-A-W-L-A-K, just to mention a few. It means to let down, take away, journey, or vanish. And I had a sighting many years ago, my wife and one of our daughters, we watched one of these things that, as we watched it traverse across the sky from the west to the east at great speeds that we could hardly keep up with it, turn their head, then it suddenly just vanished. Not over the horizon. They must have gone in, as Dr. Spock says, into warp speed. It would be like, well, let me give you another example. Now, there's a lot of people that have never even heard of the book of Jasher. Although he's mentioned in the Bible, the book has been left out, and some people will refute its authenticity, and very possibly it has been added to and embellished by these translators. But Jasher 3:27, at that time the sons of men were with Enoch, and Enoch was speaking to them, and they lifted up their eyes, and the likeness of a great horse descending from heaven, and the horse paced in the air. Well, once again, this very same thing happened in this book that happened to our Bible, because it was the Greeks, I'm sure, that translated this too. I can't be sure that I should pin that on them, but it was from the Greeks, and their mistranslation, their erroneous translation of the word Zeus to horse, and there's where we come up with the Pegasus nonsense. Note, sons of men is translated incorrectly. It reads sons of Adam in the Hebrew text. Yes, they tampered with the book of Jasher, as we explained in other chapters. But anyway, let us go to Jasher 3:28. And they told Enoch what they had seen, and Enoch said to them, on my account does this horse, or mount, this mount ship, descends upon the earth, and the time is come when I must go from you, and I shall no more be seen by you. Now, it also today, still in the English language, the old cowboys will say, what kind of mount are you riding? Whether it be a paint horse, or whether it be a roan, or won't come to me now, one of those speckled pintos. That's what I'm trying to say. It goes on to say, they shall no more be seen by you. And then Jasher 3:29, and the horse, or shall we say mount, ship, descended at that time and stood before Enoch, and all of the sons of Adam who were with Enoch saw him. Now, how did they make all this up if it doesn't confirm our version of mount, ships, and sews, and etc., as we go to another book that is still found in the center of some of our Bibles, 2nd Ezra 6:26, and they see the man that had been taken up. Let me read that again. And they see the men that have been taken up, who have not tasted death from their birth. So apparently here in 2nd Ezra, because I'm going to tell you, my friends, it belongs in the Bible. Because I have used 2nd Ezra and 1st Ezra in quite a number of my lectures and so forth, and I find that the ancient writers who wrote down the prophecies for the latter days given to them by these extraterrestrials, they're right on target, and I can see why the church world rejected them, because they didn't make sense, they didn't understand them. But apparently there's been a lot of other men who came to this planet and left this planet without being under the pang of death. Well, there's a lot of speculation on that as why not. Maybe they had come here from other worlds and had not been under the curse of the Adam man of this planet. That would seem most reasonable to me, but that is my personal opinion. We would remind you also in the New Testament, it tells of Christ taking the disciples outside of town. They went up in a mysterious mountain. They met Moses and Elijah. Now back to Genesis. The Almighty put the cherubs, or the chariots of fire, to guard the way back into the garden. Where is this garden? So they could not find the tree of life or the house of life. In other words, they could not find entrance into it again. Genesis 3:22, and the Lord God said, behold, a man is become as one of us to know good and evil, and now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. We said that there was a correlation between Genesis and Revelations. Let us look at Revelations 22:14. Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life. Now get this last verse. And may enter in through the gates into the city. So is this not the same garden or city Adam was driven out of? If that city or garden is on earth, where is it? Christ, while on the cross, he promised the repentant thief that he would be in paradise with him. Paradise in Greek, as I said before, it means garden. We find here in Luke 23:39-43, and one of the malefactors which hanged railed on him, saying, if thou be Christ, save thyself and us. 40th verse. And then the other answered and rebuked him, saying, dost thou fear God, seeing that thou art in the same condemnation? Verse 41. And we indeed justly, for we receive the due rewards of our deed. But this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. He did not say if he was baptized, talked in tongues, or had his local preacher save him, or belonged to such and such church, then I will save you. I hope this doesn't get around as business might fall off at the old local sheep shed. So I think that turning to Christ, repenting of our sins, and relying upon Him. That is our only salvation. 2 Corinthians 12:4, if you want to look it up for yourself, read both verses 2 and 4. Paul's talking about a man that he met some 14 years ago while on the backside of the desert, and he spoke of being caught up into the third heaven, and he explained that this was some geographical location. Was it the great ship Paradise, the holy city, the New Jerusalem? All through the Bible, from Moses to Jesus and other instances, the meeting place of the extraterrestrials was always on the backside of the desert. All of the churches say angels are not of this world. We've pointed out the true Hebrew word for angel is messenger, and we've proved by Scripture that they were not winged creatures. It was only symbolic that men who had the capability to fly here and yonder in something. We also proved that they traveled via spaceships. Not only sometimes they're called burning chariots and horses that pulled them across the sky, but later on we believe that we can, or I think that we're proving that this is and where the location of Venus is. Genesis 2 and 6. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. This was the new earth which John of Revelation visited it. And doesn't it not strike the reader as odd that a mist went up from the earth instead of rain coming down on the ground? A sentence in Hebrew was, you'll find this was loaded with facts and has got a ton of meaning that has long been lost to us. Preachers tells us that it didn't rain until the flood. That's not scientific. There's too much archaeological evidence, and we have Grand Canyon there that can prove otherwise as we go down through the different layers. And you go tell that to a scientist or an archaeologist or a reasonable man, and they're going to tell you hogwash. Even as a child, I wondered what caused all of the great erosions of the ground and what caused this great abyss of the Grand Canyon. Now, if you read the verses before Genesis 2 and 6, it tells us there was not a man to till the soil. It meant that there was not an Adamite. For the first part of it tells you that there were all sorts of men on whatever planet this was talking about prior to, also to replenish. The Adam man, he came to this planet to teach agriculture. Now, dealing with the verses of Genesis 2 and 6, we do not know how much time has expired, maybe decades, possibly hundreds of years, or possibly thousands, I mean to say. And looking up the words in Genesis 2:6, such as mist, earth, watered, whole, face, ground, I find a strange parallel to the account of Noah and his family. Mist had several meanings in Strong's Concordance, such as fog or cloud. You say, what has this got to do with the third heaven? Well, my friends, just hang in there like a hare in a cheeseburger, and I believe it will become self-explanatory. Because even in these tapes, we can't cover all of this evidence. Okay, now, mist, such as a fog or cloud, enveloping something as a great space station, Paradise, and all the other names that we've covered before. Earth, erats. It's from an unused root, large, what? Or particularly a land, a country, earth, a planet, field, ground, land, nations, a wilderness, or world or other worlds. So you see, when the translators wrote of Noah's flood, they used it incorrectly when they saw that it covered the whole earth instead of that nation or that country, and etc. But there I go. I want to wander off on a tangent. Now we take the word water, and the Hebrew it's S-H-A-Q-A-H, and it's pronounced Sawkaw, S-H-A-W-K-A-W, a prime root meaning to graft, irrigate, or furnish a portion, give, to let, make, to drink, drown, moisten water. Now, Strong's Concordance refers you from that, though. They're not quite sure. They send you to a prime root, which means to become tipsy. Shakar. It means to satiate with stimulating drink, or figuratively influence, to be filled with drink abundantly, to be drunk or merry. All right? So why did they use the word whole instead of just or watered the earth? So we get more suspicious and we check out the word whole, which has several meanings or choices. Did the translators choose the correct meaning? No, my friends. Strong's Concordance, the word is ith, I-ith, E-T-H. I'm sorry, let me say that. E-T-H. It means ayth, A-Y-T-H. That's the way it's pronounced. And they say that it's probably from this other word, 579, nearness, used only as a preposition or an adjective. Here, hence, with, among, against, among, before, by, for, into, out of. There's our clue. Something they did there. Got them kicked out of. And they say often with another preposition or prefixed. Then they send it this other word, 579. A-N-A-H in the Hebrew, and it's pronounced ana. A prime root meaning to groan, lament, mourn. Also a concentration as in anguish, to approach. Hence to meet in various senses, befall, deliver. They were delivered out of there. Happen, seek a quarrel. Apparently there was some sort of great quarrel. And was this a mild way of saying, as we're going to prove in later chapters, like Revelation 12 is truly right, and many other places tell about the great war in heaven, where people of these planets, they quarreled, and they were kicked out. So there seems to be little nuggets here and clues if you're able to follow all of my long, lengthy explanation. Go to the word face. It's P-A-N-I-Y-M. It's called panim, or pronounced thus, but always as a singular, and they say from an unused noun, P-A-N-E-H, and it's pronounced Pana, P-A-W-N-E-H. And then they say that's from 6437, the face as the part that turns. I'm quoting Strong. And many other examples. What they're trying to say, there's something that turned this ship or this great space station as it turned the ship or as it turned away from God. Now, he was brought to the terrestrial planes of this planet. The word ground, said in Hebrew, Adamah, sounds like Almah. From 119 in your Strongs, that's from the word soil, which it means redness, country, earth, ground, husband, man. Then they refer you to Adam, to show blood in the face, flush, or turn rosy, red, or ruddy. To paraphrase it, a great cloud encompassed this garden, this city, this space station, in which this Adam type, he resided until the one they call Satan, the treasonous one, he entered in to deceive these new arrivals. And did he introduce drugs or booze to them? The word shaka, a potion, causing them to be filled with drink abundantly, to be drunk or merry, it tells us, that they have really missed. And we find then Strong's gives us a clue to all of this to bring about perfection eventually of the Adamic peoples here. Then when he said earth equaled the Adamic man. Now, if my premise is correct, we understand Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden onto the earth east of Eden, or to the earth as Nud mistranslated Nod in Asia. Was it Cain who was called the leopard king, sun god, and etc.? He traveled from Asia to North America and South America. Did his descendants carry over the history of Cain to the people of Central and South America? Now, quoting from a book of old Mexico, it's entitled Mexican and Central America, Mythology by Irene Nicholson, page 88, Quetzalcoatl temptation in part. The evil one now tempted him with wine, but after a first refusal he dipped his little finger into the potion, and it tasted so good he agreed to drink 3 times, then a 4th and a 5th, and his servants followed suit, and soon after they were all gloriously intoxicated, growing even merrier. Quetzalcoatl, he called his sister Quetzalpelet, or Petlet, and she too drank 5 times. The slippery path to carnal excess was begun. Quetzalcoatl and Quetzalpetlet ceased to live as in former cleanliness. They no longer pierced themselves with thorns, nor performed their daily rites at dawn. End of quote. In other chapters we find very interesting parallels, that Quetzalcoatl meant Venus to the ancients of Mexico. They say that mythology is nothing but in distorted history. In Tula, Mexico, there are several large columns of carved figures. These colossal figures once supported the entrance into the temple of, my friends, there's so many letters in it that I don't believe there's a man alive that could spell it. So I won't attempt to at this time as we're running out on tape, and I don't want to run over to 2. But it was the Lord of the House of Dawn, Quetzalcoatl, Venus, day star, also called Lucifer, called the morning star, the evening star. This god was also the culture hero of the Toltecs, who dominated southern Mexico after the coming of the Aztecs, and those in whose influence the Mayan culture is plainly discernible from the 12th century A.D. We have 2 counterfeits, one real Satan, one who is referred to as the morning star as well. Christ was the only one who was entitled to the name King of Lucifer, or morning star, and we find that in Revelations, I believe, 22:17, where